An old tungsten lamp was hung in the center of the room by a black wire, flashing dimly. The quiet atmosphere was like ink dripping into water, spreading in the room. In the center of the room was a large round table, which looked modeled. In the center of the table stood a small clock with very complicated patterns, which was ticking at the moment. Around the table sat 10 people in different clothes. Their clothes looked a little worn and their faces were stained with dust. Some of them were lying on the table. Some were sitting back in their chairs, all asleep. Beside the 10 of them stood quietly a man in a goat's head mask and a black suit. His eyes peered through the worn goat's head mask and stared at the 10 of them with interest. The clock on the table rang, and the minute and our hands pointed to 12 at the same time. Far away from the room, there was a low sound of the bell. At the same moment, the 10 men and women sitting around the round table slowly woke up. After they gradually woke up, they first looked around in confusion, and then looked at each other in confusion. It seems that no one can remember why they are here. Good morning, 9. The goat head was the first to speak. I am very happy to meet you here. You have been sleeping in front of me for 12 hours. The man in front of me was really weird, startling everyone under the dim light. His mask seemed to be made of a real goat's head, and many of the hairs had turned yellow and black, knotted and glued together. 2 holes were dug into the eyes of the goat's mask, revealing his sly eyes. Not only did his actions exude the unique smell of goats, but there was also a faint smell of decay. A man with a tattooed arm was stunned for a few seconds, and finally realized the unreasonableness of this matter, and asked the goat's head with hesitation, "Who are you?" I believe you all have this question, so I will introduce it to the 9 of you. The goat head waved his hands happily, and it seemed that he had already prepared the answer. A young man named Chijia sat farthest away from the goat head, and he quickly looked at the situation in the house. After a while, his expression became serious. Strange. This room is so strange. There is no door here, and it is surrounded by walls. In other words, the room was closed, with a table in the center of the room. In that case, how did they get here? Could it be that they sent people over first and then built the wall? Chijia looked around again. Whether it was the floor, wall, or ceiling, there were horizontal and vertical lines, and these lines divided the wall and the ground into many large squares. In addition, Chijia was concerned about the 9 mentioned by the goat head. No matter how many people sat around the round table, there were 10 people in the room, including goat head himself. What did 9 mean? He reached out to touch his pocket, and as expected, the phone had been taken away. "There's no need to introduce us," a cold woman said to goat head. "I advise you to stop your behavior as soon as possible. I suspect that you have detained us for more than 24 hours, which constitutes the crime of illegal detention." As she spoke, she rubbed the dust on her arm in disgust, as if she hated being soiled even more when she was imprisoned. The words of the cold woman really made everyone sober up a lot. No matter who the other party was, he dared to kidnap 10 people by himself. No matter what, he had already violated the bottom line of the law. Wait. A middle-aged man in a white coat interrupted everyone's train of thought. He slowly looked at the cold woman and asked, "We just woke up. How did you know that we were imprisoned for 24 hours?" His tone was steady and powerful, but it hit the nail on the head. The cold woman pointed at the clock on the table unhurriedly and replied, "The clock here points to 12 o'clock, but I have the habit of going to bed late. The last time I looked at the watch at home, it was already 12 o'clock, which means that we were imprisoned for at least 12 hours. After she finished speaking, she pointed to the walls around her and continued, "You should have noticed that there is no door in this room, which means that this person has spent a lot of time to let us into this room. He said that we have been asleep for 12 hours. Now that the clock is pointing to 12 o'clock again, it means that it has turned at least twice. So I suspect that more than 24 hours. Is there a problem?" After hearing this answer, the white coat looked at the woman coldly, with suspicion still in his eyes. After all, in this environment, this woman was to calm. Would a normal person say this calmly in the face of such kidnapping? At this time, a strong young man in a black t-shirt asked, "Goathead, why are there 10 people here? But you say there are 9. Goathead was silent and did not answer immediately. "I don't care how many people are here," the man with the flower arm scolded, and he wanted to stand up when he propped up the table, but found that his legs were limp and could not use his strength. So he could only continue to point at the goat's head and say, "Fancheng, I advise you to be more sensible. You may not know how serious the consequences of provoking me are, and I will really kill you." As soon as these words came out, the expressions of the men present gradually became serious. If they could subdue the goat's head together, the situation would still be under control. However, everyone found that their legs had been injected with something, and they were completely unable to use force at this time. Therefore, the flower-armed man could only threaten the goat's head with words, shouting loudly. Shijia did not open his mouth. Reaching out and stroking his chin slightly, he stared at the clock on the table thoughtfully. It seemed that things were not as simple as he imagined. He knew that the goat had said 9 participants, and if there were 10 people here, it could only prove that one of them was not a participant. Then who was he? There were 6 men and 4 women sitting in the room. Could it be that one of them was a kidnapper? The goat had stopped talking and slowly came to Chishia's side and stood behind a young man. Everyone followed his gaze, only to find that the young man in front of him was different from everyone present. Although his face was also dirty, it was filled with a happy smile. The goat's head slowly raised his palm and placed it on the back of the young man's head. The young man's smile became more and more strange, and he looked at everyone with excitement, as if he had already known something. Only a muffled sound was heard, and the goat-headed man slammed the young man's head hard on the table. The pink and white things were like a shower of paint, which was spread horizontally on the table in an instant, and everyone's face was splattered with blood. The young man's head was smashed to pieces on the table. Outside the room, a distant bell rang again. Chi Jia was very close to the deceased, and he felt an unknown object stick to his face, warm and sticky. He asked himself that his psychological quality was strong enough, but he didn't expect to shake at this moment. The girl sitting on the right of the deceased was stunned for 3 seconds and finally twisted her face and screamed. This scream tore through everyone's psychological defenses. It was able to smash the hardest skull of a human on the table with his hands. Was that goat head still a human? Why could his thin body burst into such a powerful force? The goat head slowly said, "The reason why I prepared 10 people is because I want to use one of them to calm you down."